Okay, alright.
Hello and welcome back to the Make Lemonade podcast, a show brought to you by Lemon Squeezies. We hope to inspire you to make money from your own lemonade stand. I'm one of your co-hosts, James, and JR is back with me this week to speak with a special guest. You might have heard of John O'Nolan, who's the founder of Ghost, an independent publishing platform. John sees Ghost as an experiment in doing the opposite of what every other tech company does. They haven't raised VC, instead setting up Ghost as a non-profit that can never be bought or sold. The core product is open source with a simple SaaS model to fund future development. John is opinionated and outspoken, but with many views that are quite hard to argue, to be honest, although people will try. So I can't wait to dive into some of those today. John, welcome to the pod. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me, guys.
Good to have you. Now, let's go way back, because I don't know if you've spoken much about this online, but you started out doing a music degree, John. What music were you trying to pursue? Was this sort of your life goal?
Kind of. I mean, like any good teenage boy, I wanted to be a rock star, right? So there's a place in Brighton in the UK, on the south coast, called the Brighton Institute of Modern Music. And I'm a 2-time high school dropout, so I didn't stand much chance of getting into higher education unless it was off the back of something like an audition, which is what I ended up doing. Unfortunately, I eventually figured out that I was an incredibly average musician, and I was surrounded by incredibly talented musicians who were not doing so good. All their talent still didn't get them success, and so my estimation of my likelihood of succeeding in the music business was dropping pretty quick. So I ended up making websites for them.
Yeah.
And that's how we got here.
What do you play? What is your music of choice?
A lot. So I grew up playing all kinds of different classical instruments, and then when I was studying contemporary music, it was kind of singer-songwriter, guitar.
Do you have anything released out into the world, and do you do any of it now?
I do, not under my own name. I'm gonna keep that all completely anonymous, because that's what makes me happy. It's actually one of my big beliefs these days is if you want true creativity on the internet, you have to do it anonymously. I don't necessarily mean for starting a business, but if you want absolute freedom in writing or creating music or doing something, I think doing it under a stage name or ghostwriting it under a different handle puts different energy into the thing that's being created. And that's been really interesting for me. I think as you start a business and you have to deal with the responsibility of being the face for that business a lot, there's a lot of pressure that comes with that. So a couple of years ago, I set up a newsletter for just a hobby of mine. Did it without my name anywhere on it. There's no links to it. There's nothing, no trace of it is related to me. And I find that when I write posts on that site, on that newsletter, my creativity just flows in a way that it absolutely doesn't these days when I am writing and deleting the same tweet, 10 times in a given day because, someone's going to take it the wrong way and someone's going to be offended and someone's going to try and reframe it to be something it's not. So yeah, there's music out there, but it's on my it's under stage names, and I like to keep those things separate when I can.
That's really interesting. First of all, I find it interesting that you write and rewrite tweets, because some of them seem like you're just out there shooting the shots that you want to shoot. But I do
you should see the ones that get deleted.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Oh dear.
And it's funny, just back to what John was saying about, I actually have done the same thing. I have a newsletter that's totally anonymous. So I can actually say, and what's funny about it is there's a lot of people that say, oh, well, John, I'm picking on John, but John's lucky because he has a big following. So whatever he tweets, he's got an audience to build something, right? And so
double-edged sword. It's
funny when you get the other way, you kind of are like you said, there's a responsibility. You're nervous to say things, there is that freedom that opens up when you're anonymous. It's really hard to capture that in words, but it's powerful.
Yeah, and on the anonymity. Thank you, John. On that, you've seen a small handful of people do it. AJ from Card is the most notable one in sort of the indie hacker space. It's a wonderful example of someone building something without their name out there. JR, what do you think about that? Do you ever wish, or are you quite happy with yourself being out there?
No, sometimes there's a lot that I actually try to bring in that no one knows about, because it's scary, about what, you hear stories. So I definitely think that it's important to probably protect yourself a little bit in today's world.
I mean, kind of what led me to a lot of this in recent years was, it turns out if you ever, if anyone listening is thinking about a new startup idea and they're trying to come up with names, here's just like a really important tip that I wish someone had told me. Don't name your company after what every single teenage boy hacker wants to be called as their hacker handle. Because it turns out they will try and hack you. So being at Ghost on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and all these other places has been the source of just non-stop hack attempts for years and years. And in 2019, I was SIM swapped and blackmailed by a teenage hacker who was later federally indicted, and in a sting operation that covered the US and the UK hacking circle, stealing cryptocurrency and social media handles to the tunes of tens of millions.
No way.
And it was a harrowing experience to see him exploit my identity, my accounts, and I have already had at that time all my security dialed up, 2FA, everything, and there was still all manners. If you've never heard of SIM swapping, Google it. It's terrifying. There's still all manners of insecure ways that are just very easy to co-opt. So since that, I've been a lot more sensitive to what I do and don't put online, how much personal information I share online. But unfortunately it's an important thing these days.
Yeah, I should probably take that more seriously too. I don't think I've experienced what you've experienced, John, that way. I mean, with my case with Lemon Squeezy, I just got a bunch of people that are talking about the saying or juicing or something, so I don't have the same thing, but it's still real and it's still out there, so it's a good reminder.
No, totally. And as your notoriety builds, and for you, JR, and you, John, your wealth builds, people are going to be after you for stuff, and if they can exploit you, that's scary. So let's talk origins. You launched Ghost through Kickstarter 11 years ago. Why launch it as a non-profit, John? Because you've just removed a lot of optionality there for you in future.
Oh, yeah. And that was kind of the whole point. That was the desire, is to remove a lot of optionality. I think, so I got into contributing to WordPress as a volunteer open source contributor because I was a freelancer building sites with WordPress, and I would do a lot of them. And I figured if I contributed to the core platform, I could probably increase my day rate because my status as a WordPress developer would be higher. Seemed like a good business decision. But along the way, I got caught up in the beautiful story that is open source and the principles of open source and why open source exists, and the story of Linux and Eric, God, what's his name? The Bazaar and the Butchering, the old open source essay where they compare Linux to Microsoft, essentially. But the principles that it stood for really resonated with me, and the idea that we should all collaborate on software and collaborate rather than just build the same things endlessly to democratize publishing and do something good in the world. All of that really, really resonated. And the problem was, as I got deeper and deeper into how the sausage is made in the WordPress community, I found more and more that the values that were espoused didn't match the reality of how things happened, how decisions were made, how the product moved forward or didn't move forward. Often it was not about what was best for the users. It was other factors that were going into decisions. And a lot of that felt like and seemed like it was driven fairly heavily by there being this venture-funded silverback gorilla in the room, which was Automatic. And this very tenuous relationship between who owns the WordPress trademark and what is the WordPress Foundation, who's on the board, and no one really knows, and you're not really allowed to ask. But then there's rules about who can do certain things at conferences, and if you don't align exactly with this, you're out. It was all very messy. And so that, it took some of the magic out of, this idea of open source for me. And at the same time, WordPress was shifting from being a publishing platform to this, compete with Squarespace website builder. And so I had this idea of well, what if you just tried to do this only for publishing, really democratize publishing? No other ulterior motive, no 1.1 billion in VC in the background, manipulating what direction you have to go, no little stories of how things are really going on and what, just do what you say. Just actually do what you actually say you're going to do. Make the best possible product for users and be unassailably good as much as possible. And so it started as a thought experiment. And I thought, well, okay, what would you do if you just made the opposite decisions of every other company? So if you say, I don't want to get wealthy off this, what do? Well, you make it a nonprofit. So I don't own Ghost. I'm a trustee, which means I can control and steer the company, but I own no part of it. I don't have any shares to sell. So if I ever choose to move on, I can pass my trusteeship to someone else, but that's it. I can earn a salary, pay me a great salary and I have a wonderful quality of life, but there's no light at the end of the tunnel of like, I have to sell it someday.
Yeah.
And so it's what started as a thought experiment turned into a published blog post, which turned into a Kickstarter campaign as sharing this idea seemed to resonate with people. And I wanted to prove out the idea that you could start an open source project with sustainable economics that would be able to keep it going, but without needing to have this, rocket ship VC ride to world domination. I don't want to change the world. I don't want to dent the universe. I don't want to crush it. I don't want to do any of those things. I just want to make cool software with great people and enjoy doing it and do it in a way that feels good and that I think is good, that is as objectively good as something can be. That's the ambition. Whether we always succeed is a different question, but that's the goal.
Were you modeling this on anyone else, or were you just figuring it out as you go?
No, there's sort of bits and pieces of it which were modeled on others. For example, the business model, we do managed hosting. We have an open source product.
Yeah.
That was modeled a little bit after, the relationship of WP Engine and WordPress.org. And it always frustrated me. Like, why do you have WordPress.com, this stupid handicap platform that can't run plugins and you can't use the themes you want to use? Ridiculous. It's like a social network with no options. You could have just made WP Engine, which everyone wants, and have that fund the project. It makes so much sense. But in terms of, doing it as a nonprofit and some of these weird other decisions, I mean, doing it in JavaScript, Node.js was like baby. We were version 0.10 when Go started. No, some of those were just like, I wonder if this would work as a limitation. And yeah, a lot of creativity came from those limitations, those self-imposed limitations.
Yeah, and I think it's like, that saying, put your money where your mouth is? I mean, that's literally what, John, you did. I mean, the nonprofit thing, like, that is a pretty bold statement, to do. Like, because even if John went around the internet and said, guys, I promise that I really want this to be this independent thing, right? He could say that until he's blue in the face.
You've heard it
before, the fact that it's a nonprofit, right? Like he, you know what I mean? It's like he doesn't need to say it, and so that's amazing. The Node.js thing, I didn't realize how. I mean, everybody knows about Node now, but like, and where it's come, but like that is like, you talk about some early vision there. That's impressive. Yeah.
I think vision in that context is generous. I think we made a bet that paid off. We made a bunch of other bets that did not pay off. But for context, like, there wasn't an RSS package in Node.js. That's how early it was. Like, we so many things, and this is why some people might not know Gilbert, who works at Lemon Squeezy, was my first ever co-founder. We made a WordPress themes company together many, many moons ago. And something I'm jealous of you guys now building with Laravel is, God, your ecosystem's amazing. You have so many things that you can pull off as a starting point, a foundation to build on top of, that mean you're going to have a stable app as you build up and build out, and you can go quarter. Mm-hmm. Doing that in JavaScript, one, is hard anyway, and it doesn't exist because there is no Rails, there is no Laravel, there is no Django. But doing it with Node in 2013, amplify that by a lot. And so Node grew, but one of the challenging things for us about working with Node over the years has been, it really hasn't been used nearly as much to build full stack web apps like Ghost. It has been used a lot for performant microservices and APIs, but people don't typically build the types of things with Node that they do with Laravel and Rails. So the ecosystem for our use cases is a lot smaller, which means we often are having to invent the dependencies that we need, as well as the application that needs them. It's
so funny, John, you say that, because literally the other day I was talking to Gilbert, and he said the same thing in the Laravel way. He's like, oh, well, we could just leverage this, right, to build this certain thing. Yeah. And I think I take it for granted a little bit. And so hearing that makes me think that hey, John, circling back to Kickstarter, which is another thing that you did, it was very different. I'm looking at it right now. You had 5,236 backers, and 196 pounds was raised to bring the project to life. That was
196,000.
Yeah.
196 wouldn't have gotten us very far.
Sorry, 196,000. Yeah, 196,000 pounds. Is that like at the time, just trying to get your mindset back then? Were you kind of just filled with, surprise and delight? Was it what you were expecting? Did it kind of knock you away? What was your reaction when that happened?
Yeah, it was definitely more traction than I could have hoped for. So 6 months before that Kickstarter, I'd just written a blog post that was sort of this pitch, this idea of Ghost, and that had hit the front page of Hacker News, and I think I had 30,000 email addresses put into a like sign up if I ever do anything with this type thing. So I knew there was some interest, but the goal that I put on the Kickstarter campaign, and by the way, this was like early Kickstarter days as well. It was maybe Kickstarter had been around for a year or two. There really hadn't been many big software things on there. The biggest thing at the time in the open source space was Ouya, which was the open source games console. And so the idea was, okay, we've got 30,000 email addresses, people saying they're interested with signing up to hear more. Can we get people to open their wallets and say they're interested with prepayments? And frame it like in the best possible way people do on Kickstarter, like the top Kickstarter projects. And so the goal for the Kickstarter was $30,000, which I thought, I could work on this for 6 months kind of thing and do like a first version. In hindsight, no way. And it ended up raising the equivalent, all things said and done, of about $350,000 in 29 days, and went pretty viral, got picked up by all kinds of people. But a lot of the reason it got picked up was precisely because of it being nonprofit and different, and these weird decisions, these weird limitations or choices that were part of the story. It wasn't just like, here's a new publishing platform. It was like, here's a new publishing platform and here's why. Here's why and what for. I remember sitting in the cafe the first night I did launch I was in, just with my phone leaning up against a glass of beer, which was live refreshing Kickstarter total going up, and thinking, like, oh, fuck, what have I done? And one of those things that you don't recognize it really in the moment, because it's all happening in the moment. You don't appreciate it or think like, oh my God, it's so incredible, which I think prior to doing it, I always imagined like, wow, it must feel so good. And in reality, it just was a blur, and then it was a sprint to deliver on the promises of the Kickstarter campaign. And it's only kind of now, sort of a decade later, I can look back and look at it with a bit more separation, think that was a pretty special moment.
JR, do you kind of feel the same way with Lemon Squeezy over the last couple of years and months?
Yeah, I definitely think the comment John's made about in the moment, it's hard to appreciate. You kind of need some time and space to have the reflection points, right? That's probably anything with life, but where you kind of look back after some time and you're like, man, that was pretty amazing. So yeah, I can see it now. And I think for John, another bet that you made was, at the time was blogging has gone through, just like SEO, it's like blogging's dead, right? Email's dead, SEO's dead. Like the longevity of blogging for you and that bet of saying, no, publishing here on the internet's here to stay, and I see a future of where we want to go with this, and here's how we're going to do it at Ghost. I think you've contributed to a lot of the way things are done that way, and I think that's important. Like I think we talked about this the other day, John. It's like same shit, different decade. So you almost see a resurgent of like, it's like 90s style, right? Like it's the same thing. Like we're seeing things come back now where it's like, well, wait a minute. I actually think I want to own this stuff, and I think I want to be in control of this, and I think I want to be right. Like, so you're seeing this all kind of repeat itself. Yeah. And so now, John, you're now in a situation 11 years later where you have the platform to be able to support that new wave. And so I wonder what that wave's going to be like where you fast forward another 10 years, and what things are going to look like. And so anyway, a lot of good stuff to get into probably. And I don't know which way you want to go with this, James, but I think there's a lot we could kind of unpack if it's the last 10 years of what John's been doing to build Ghost to this point.
Let's go there first. The last 10 years of independent publishing, John, has it surprised you, the longevity it has? I think I might know the answer, but it seems like in a world where there's so much focus on growing your audience on these other platforms rather than your owned ones. No,
honestly, it hasn't surprised me. I'm long on the web. I don't mean I've been on the web for a long time. I mean, I'm bullish on the web, and I always will be, because the decentralized nature of it means it's so hard to kill. And it's the same with email, right? Platforms will always come and go, and they will rise and fall. Some will get popular, some won't. But infrastructure, things that aren't controlled by companies, they tend to stick around. And that's true digitally as well as not digitally. The infrastructure that we have typically sticks around a lot longer than the products that are built on top of the infrastructure. So the open web, I don't think it's going anywhere short of a total change in format for how we consume information. And to some extent, you could argue that video is that a little bit, and augmented reality might be that if it ever becomes a real thing. But short of that, the thing that's going to stick around is the infrastructure and the open protocols that we have, whether it's HTTP or SMTP. Those are the things that outlast. And honestly, like, our best marketing strategy as an open source project is to outlast the competition. Mm-hmm. Any of our competitors who raise any amount of money, you're raising it from a set of investors who are raising money from an LP, limited partners. And those limited partners have a fund life cycle, and that fund must close within a period of time. It means they have to get some sort of return on investment within a period of time. That means there is a ceiling, there is a timeline on when that business has to have some sort of dramatic change, either being sold, going public, or shutting down, typically. And there are other forms of liquidity events that are less common that make this, that there are other options. It's just they're not very common. So, when Ghost first got started, everyone was very excited about Medium and Subtle. They were the hot things. If you were anyone, you were publishing one of those. And then those platforms became less popular or pivoted or raised more money or couldn't meet their valuation, has to do a down round. Ev just plowed more money into Medium. And eventually, they stopped being the trendy thing because it got to the end of the point where they could get any more investment for them. Same thing's now repeating in the email space a little bit. But sticking around and being around for a long time, both in open source and in open web, I think is a huge advantage and something that allows you to take a really long view and make decisions, again, that are very different to what other people do. Something I like to say in our hiring page sometimes is, when we do work at Ghost, we try and think in decades, not in years. We try and think in where the whole market is moving, not just in what can we build in the next month that is going to allow us to get to another round raised next year or an exit next year.
Mm-hmm. So, John, you're bullish on open source, no VC, non-profits, but that's partly because of the nature of your business, the platforms being so open. But are you against VC for all companies? Do you think there's some companies it can work for?
I think venture capital is a tool, and it's important for capital-intensive businesses. If you have a business that requires, you cannot build SpaceX without VC, right? It can't be done. You probably can't build Stripe without VC. Right. I don't think that can be done. Can you build Ghost without VC? Oh my God, yes. Can you build half of the fucking things that Y Combinator funds without VC? Oh my God, 80% of them should just be a Laravel app or a Rails app, and let's go. What are you waiting for? This is ridiculous. You're just typing on a laptop. What do you need VC for? What's so expensive? Why do you need millions to type on a laptop? It doesn't make any sense. So I think it is an important tool that should be used for startup businesses that are capital intensive and who can only achieve the things that they're setting out to achieve with capital. And there are plenty of examples of those businesses. It's just that it's an overused tool these days a lot of the time.
Do you think there are more businesses that should follow the non-profit model? And you were saying you've not modeled it off many others in tech. You were sort of taking bits from what you've seen.
Yeah.
From people following the Ghost example, have you seen more come up, and should more people take that approach?
I have heard of starting nonprofits looking at what we've done. I have kind of a mixed view of this now. So I wouldn't do it again. I would do it again with Ghost, because the model of a platform for journalism in having integrity and transparency, I think is completely aligned with what we want journalism to be and what journalism is. And I think there's a very important piece there. For any other business, my experience in the realities of running a nonprofit in the way the Ghost is set up it has introduced complexity that has been more of a disadvantage than an advantage. And so some trivial examples of that would be accountants. They really don't know what to do with nonprofits. It's very difficult. You talk to a bank and they're like, what do you mean you're a nonprofit? I don't understand. Then you immediately get classified as a high risk business, because nonprofits, they don't make money. So banks don't want to give them, you can't have a credit card, Amex won't touch you or talk to you. There's all kinds of logistical complexities that have come with it that have wasted time and energy of having to work around them. And what I perceived might be a potential upside, I thought, you make great nonprofit in tech, kind of like Mozilla aspires to be. You probably get all this funding from Gates Foundation and the Knight Foundation and Google's foundations and all these philanthropic people who are just like, oh my God, finally a good tech company. Here, have money. Weirdly, it turns out that doesn't happen at all. So I would say I would probably do a B Corp. If you know what a B Corp is, it's worth half an hour of your time to go and Google it. But B Corps essentially put profit and purpose in the environment on an equal playing fields, but they are much simpler logistically to manage. I think that's my ideal these days.
And John, there's no doubt that taking a different approach to everyone else has helped, but also Ghost Products is just so much better than the competition. It's so beautiful. It's easy to spin up. I've used Ghost for years. So what's been your approach to making that product really good?
Well, I appreciate that. I think we do a pretty good job overall, but I think anyone with your own product, all you see is what it could be, not what it is. And so I feel that there's a long way for us to go, and competitors certainly have some advantages in some places that keeps us on our toes. I think one of the things that attracted me to the idea of this nonprofit experiment and never being able to sell the company is that it's a forcing factor for focus. If there is no option to think about, well, if we did this, then maybe so-and-so would want to acquire us. And if we did that, then maybe we could raise this round because we'd have this moat and that would be a competitive advantage and blah, blah, blah. So all these potential avenues that you could explore on that adventure. And if you set up a company you can never sell, then a lot of those go away. There's not right, I really don't want to do this, but it's going to triple our revenue in the next year. And that's going to make us way more attractive in the next round. So maybe we should. There's no things you do that you don't really believe in that you're going to put up with, because for what? My salary, if our revenue triples next year, my salary doesn't change. Or if it does, it's incremental. It's just a salary. I don't have dividends. I don't have profit share. So the motivation has always been to just do what's best for users. And the focus has always been to just try and make the best possible product for users. I think in some areas we succeed, in some areas we haven't on that front. But the focus has been unrelenting. And I think that shows up. Where we do it well, I think that shows up in the experience people have with the product.
How do you view competition in that light then? Because you've got so many VC-funded, bro-y competitors in the newsletter and blogging space.
Good way of putting it. So fortunately, they have to optimize for very different things because of the amount of money they raise. So at this point, I think Substack's raised close to 90 million, Beehive's raised 40 something. Venture capitalists want a 10 times return, right? So you're looking at these companies need to achieve a valuation of between $400 and $800 million based on what they've raised so far. And they're probably going to raise more. So they have to capture this enormous slice of the market to achieve that valuation. They have to have a lot of revenue or a huge amount of market share, which means they have to go for a predictably large model. So Substack is trying to become a social network. A few weeks ago, they introduced a direct messaging feature, an email platform with a direct messaging feature. If that doesn't tell you something's a little weird here, it should. They are very much trying to replace Twitter. They're trying to replace social media and become a social network. They're trying to be, the platform where everyone goes to do their writing. The same kind of strategy as what Medium has tried for many years. Beehive, on the other hand, is trying to become an advertising platform. They're trying to, we're YouTube. We have all of the creators. Big companies come and pump their ads into our creators. We don't want to do either one of those things. That sounds fucking shit. Becoming a social network? God, no. Becoming an enormous ad platform? Not for me. So they're going in different directions to what we're going anyway. We just want to be the good, easy choice that doesn't have an ulterior motive of trying to sell you ads or trying to increase engagement. The kind of Shopify of this space is probably the best sort of description I can think of.
John, how do you ship at Ghost? How do you prioritize? Do you have a roadmap? Do you have a backlog? Is it driven by the community? Is it just pull requests come in and, oh, this looks good, or, who's doing that? Is that mostly you? And how do you do that?
The question is probably the one to which the answer has changed the most over the life of Ghost as the team has grown. I think at every stage of the company, the answer to that would have been slightly different. In the early days, pretty much all then me in a mix of individual contributors. These days we're 35 people now. I've got a fantastic VP of products, a great VP of engineering. Hannah and I are able to step back and have a slightly larger think about where we want to be going, whilst having a fantastic management team try and take care of the process of delivering products. We're at an awkward stage right now of, a decade of technical foundations, some of which are great and some of which you would describe as debt that has not been paid off, and a fairly large team, but not large enough to have a really clear set of processes and squads, the Spotify approach, not big enough for any of that. So it's a constant challenge. We did Shape Up for a few years. Now we're kind of trying to shift more into having autonomous teams that can own certain areas more directly. So we look more at Linear for how they do products these days for inspiration. But it's a constant evolution. I don't know that any answer or anything we've tried has ever felt like, oh yeah, this is the way to do it. We've got this on lock.
So mostly, like, if a new feature comes in, is that coming in from the Ghost team, or is the community have some sort of influence over that, what you guys work on?
It's kind of everywhere. So we have a forum, one category of the forum, the topics can be voted on. So that's kind of the ideas category. And we look at that, and it's one of the inputs. Another of the inputs is, things we hear from customers in talking to them and support and having conversations. Another is what people are talking about most frequently or most passionately on social channels or on their own sites. And another is our own ideas, things that we want the products to do and to be. And that one holds more weight, I think, at Ghost than at most companies, because if we don't want to do something, again, it's a non-profit. I'm not in this. Like, if you did this, I would pay 10 times as much. I don't care. There's enterprise companies that really want us to have like SOC compliance and HIPAA and security audits and fill out their security questionnaire. And we say, no, I don't want to do that. Not for $1,000 a month, not for $10,000 a month. That's not my idea of a good time. So our opinions definitely filter into the product process a lot, because I always say building Ghost is building a company that you're happy to be stuck with. So we only do things. We only make decisions that we're happy to be stuck with, because there's no exit. There's no like, well, I only have to deal with this for a bit. It's like, whatever we do is something we're going to have to deal with.
John, how do you run your team? Do you guys have weekly meetings? Is it Slack? Like, how do you guys communicate? And do you do meetups? And how does that all look?
Yeah. Slack, primary communication. Then we have, groups of teams that typically have their own meetings. And then quarterly, we try and get everyone together and sort of resync on whatever initiatives that we've taken on for that quarter, like how that went, what we're going to do next. We used to do retreats twice a year, kind of every 6-ish months. Then there was a big gap around COVID, obviously. Now, it's funny, like one of the things that that has changed, at least for us over the course of a decade, is when Go started, most of the team was in our mid to early 20s. No one had any kids, or like maybe only one person had kids. And so retreats were like, hell yeah, let's get together. Let's get the beers in. Let's have a hack day. Let's ship some shit.
Yeah.
And, a decade on, average age of the team is probably mid-30s. People who are on the Ghost team typically stay on the Ghost team for a long time. We have a really good retention. So the average age has gone up. Equally, as company's gotten further, we've needed more experienced people. They often tend to be older. And there's a lot of people with kids now. So now when we talk about doing a retreat, it's like, okay, well, I got to fit it around like the summer holidays and this like dentist appointment for a root canal. And I've got 8 weddings to go to. And it's not like this is so fantastic anymore. It's like we're doing this because we know it's important, but the vibe around it is very different. It's also no longer just 5 of us sitting in an Airbnb hacking on computers, right? These days we're renting out enormous wedding venues, which, by the way, is a great hack for medium-sized remote companies, wedding venues.
That's hilarious.
I used to love when I worked for a company doing away days and fun things throughout the year, and now I work by myself. It's like I have to try and find events to go to where you actually see humans rather than sitting in this room that I do all day.
I talk about this sometimes in the sense of it being an energy bank account that you have with your teammates. If you're co-located in an office, there's work and stress depletes your bank account, your social capital that you have with another person. There's friction, there's a challenge, it's difficult. But then in an office, you grab a coffee, you go for lunch, you get a pizza on a Friday and maybe have a drink and chat about life. And that puts the energy bank into the bank account. In remote, I think what happens is you just deplete the bank account a lot, and there's not a lot of opportunities to add to it. And so we've always thought about team retreats as a way of making a massive deposit into the social bank account of our team and how they relate to each other. And what we find consistently is that after a retreat, productivity goes up dramatically because people want to talk more. And the reason they want to talk more is they go, hey, remember that joke on the retreat last week? That inside joke of the funny thing that happened, or whatever song it was we all got obsessed with, and whatever we were teasing our Australian developer JLo about. And that leads into more productive work because it's like, oh yeah, how's it going with the project? What's next? Nice. And that is intangible, but if you do it and measure it, it's there. It's very visible. And I can't recommend it enough from that point of view. Getting people together, getting people to have closer relationships with each other, the impacts on their working relationships with each other is fairly profound.
For sure. John, I want to round off on a couple of things. We've mentioned this, Fediverse, ActivityPub. I was looking into this because I saw one of your tweets saying you're almost as excited about this as you were pre-2008 open web vibes. But as I was reading it, I couldn't quite figure out what it was. There's these terms that are thrown around, and you've got this lovely page which is well written, and I'm reading through it thinking this is a lot of words, and I can't quite understand what this is.
Let me see if I can do a better job of giving an explanation that will resonate with everyone. ActivityPub is a web standard, so it's a protocol that can be used, much in the same way you have HTTP, which is how the web works, and SMTP, which is how email works. ActivityPub is one of those. It's a set of rules and standards for a piece of technology you can build that will work with other people who have built something that's compatible or works in the same way. The best way to think about it is it's like email if email were public. So what does email do? You sign up for a Gmail account. Who can you email? Anyone. Right? You can email someone on Outlook. You can email someone on a business address, on Fastmail, on ProtonMail. It doesn't matter. Email is email, and you can sign up for a provider. So you can just use email no matter which company you happen to buy email from. If you sign up for Twitter, though, you can only send tweets to people on Twitter. You can't send tweets to people on Threads. You can't send tweets to people on Instagram. You can't send tweets to people on Facebook. They can't DM you. You can't reply. You can't like. You can't interact. So that's a closed network. All of these social networks are closed networks where you have one company, it runs one platform, you buy into one network, they control the rules. With a protocol like email, you have many companies. They're all using the same piece of technology, but there's no restriction on who you can talk to and how it works. Everything is interoperable. The web, you have many websites. You can link between them. You can move and navigate between them. ActivityPub is that for public statuses. A status could be a tweet. It could be a blog post. It could be an image. A status is any piece of content that you want to put out into the world and you want people to be able to subscribe to receive. And you want them to be able to respond, like, reply. So the earliest examples of ActivityPub were Mastodon, which by all accounts was not the easiest to understand, not the most intuitive, but it did lay a lot of the groundwork for showing people what type of thing could be possible. So Mastodon is the same thing as Twitter, but it's totally open. Anyone can run a server. Anyone can have a copy of that software. Anyone can interact with Mastodon from a different app. Inside, outside, it's totally, totally open. At the same time, you have PixelFed, which is like Instagram, but on ActivityPub. Ghost is going to be like Medium or some other Tumblr on ActivityPub. But all of these things are interoperable and compatible in the same way that email is interoperable and compatible. So rather than being stuck with one company that could be taken over by a billionaire who burns it to the ground. You have a network that is agnostic of any one person, company, or individual who's controlling it.
I think John's right. I think he's probably trying to get early adopters, so the language on the page is definitely more specific around that.
Yeah.
And I think even if you, so as he moves forward, I think, yeah, John, you'll have to speak a little bit more. There is great titles within that page further down. Like there's one that says something along the line, a universal way for people to subscribe to your work, right? Like you're going to have to kind of lean into that eventually. And it's like, and then if you take it to, you actually apply it to a product like Mastodon, like you said, is people kind of got hung up on like, I got to spin up a server and this is now getting technical and I'm confused and I'm scared. So we're going to have to create, I call it the Space Mountain thing, where you put the ride on top and you turn the lights off and just let people get on the ride. There's going to have to be maybe that shift to let ActivityPub do its thing. But I think foundationally, from a protocol perspective, platforms to protocols, I think is really powerful. And I think if people can wrap their heads around email as a protocol, this is a different protocol. Here's how it works, right? I think that's the simplest way to kind of break it down, and it makes a lot of sense.
I think with open technologies, you typically have this life cycle where, because they emerge in this chaotic, disorganized way, almost this anarchical way, they're often difficult to understand early on because they don't have, a company inventing a closed product has a product leader who's making decisions, making a product, has a target audience, and you go, here's Twitter, and it happens, or here's Linear, and it's, that's a polished product. But, in the internet started out complex, and then we got browsers, and then we got standards, and then we got things that made it easier, and then we got apps, and that was built on the backbone, and it all got nice. Encryption, very difficult. Eventually, PGP, GPG turned into Signal and encrypted messengers. Bitcoin, very complicated. No one's going to fucking use it until you don't really need to know what Bitcoin is, in the same way no one really needs to know what HTTP or SMTP is. I think this will go through similar life cycles. The early adopters are always kind of interested in the technology and figuring it out. And then as you make it easier and easier and easier to use, eventually you stop caring about what the protocol is. You just care what the benefits are. And it takes longer because you're organizing disorganized groups of people with different motivations and different ambitions a lot of the time. But the longevity is powerful.
John, I'm going to round off on two questions. First of which is, you have building a publishing platform for over a decade. What are some of the best publications, newsletters you follow and enjoy?
At the moment, Stratechery I've been a subscriber of for years. Ben Thompson was a lot of inspiration for us, and even pursuing, subscriptions in Ghost, and that as a business model that was viable. Casey Newton, Platform and News, is a regular read for me. 404 Media is a newer one that runs on Ghost that I've been loving, which is made by some former Vice news journalists that cover just some of the coolest, most interesting stories on the web, and are driving really interesting change with real journalism these days that I highly recommend and enjoy. People in the US, Tangle News is one that I read fairly regularly. It's essentially, Isaac Saul summarizes the news of the day, and he goes, here's what the left is saying, here's what the right is saying, here's what I think is like the overall picture. So when you're reading headlines, you're going, oh my God, that sounds terrible, but is it just another, what the fuck? He's distilling it down and trying to make sense of turning the extremes into a middle ground that allows you to understand the different perspectives on a single story, which I find is one of the most useful ways for interacting with a polarized news environment. So those are some of my main ones.
I love that. I love how people come up with formats that are simple in idea, hard in execution, but when it's nailed, it comes out like that. Final thing, John. What do you do outside of Ghost? What do you enjoy? What are your hobbies when you're not doing all this stuff?
Outside of travel, I've been nomadic for 14 years now, living all over the world. Believe it or not, I still, for my sins, try and make music. So it's more like electronic music production these days, but that's always something I try and do. I love home automation projects. So my favorite open source project in the world is Home Assistant, which is one of the largest open source projects on GitHub. I don't know if you've ever had any interest in home automation and you like tinkering with software and you're maybe a developer. Home Assistant is like a playground for your skill set, because everything you know about software starts to be useful in the real world and doing stuff with hardware. and it's just tons of fun. So a few things like that, hanging out with friends, usual things, and doing my best to have work-life balance whenever I can.
Yeah. Is there a home automation? Because it sounds like you've gone deep into this and you're very thoughtful about the things that you do. Is there a home automation that you can think of that you're like, oh, other people should try this because it is game changing and it's not obvious?
There are, but they're all things that are so weirdly unique to certain tasks that I do, or like nuances of my life, that they would probably just sound completely random to you. But the cost is so low of like messing with it. Unlike the Apple ecosystem and the Amazon ecosystem, all these things, you can get a Raspberry Pi for no money. The software, home assistant's free. You can get sensors and like components for, $5 on Amazon. And then using very, very simple YAML config files and automation UIs, you can make fairly complex things happen. Okay, I'll give you a really simple example. I have a good morning automation where I can just say to my smart speaker, who shall remain nameless, good morning, and I will get a list of the weather for today, what's on my personal calendar, what's on my work calendar. She'll then go through and play the 5-minute podcast editions of some of my favorite news shows, and will then put on my Spotify Discover Weekly. But if there's likely to be some sort of thunderstorm, then conditionally I'll get an extra warning about that. And if there's any conflicts on my calendar, then that will get called out ahead of time. Then in the same thing at night, light will be turned off, power heavy systems will be shut down, security system will be turned on, like all that kind of stuff. And, it sounds not that crazy, but making that work and having it interact with being able to tell you like, oh, you left this door open, this window open as you go to bed, or something like that, it feels like magic. And knowing and understanding how it works under the hood, because you made it yourself, it's one I've gotten a lot of pleasure out of.
For sure.
It sounds like Tony Stark.
Open source, like real garage tinkering Tony Stark.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah. It's Iron Man 1 when he's building the first one, that's what he's doing. So, hey, before we go, John, I just got to say, genuinely just appreciate you as, you've kind of marked a bit of territory in the internet, right? Like you sacrificed something for the greater good to build Ghost the way you did. And I think you had a lot of upside there that you kind of forewent to make this possible. And so I think there's just gratitude and appreciation that you did that. And I think I didn't fully recognize it until this episode. And so it makes me think, how could I leverage Ghost? There's just a lot of good as we look ahead in the next 10 years of the internet and how it's growing up and what the influences we have for the next generations. I'm not trying to get too deep, but I truly think, I believe that. And I think that there's a lot of good, and it's nice to see someone so opinionated, and it all comes back to even the nonprofit setup, so it's just like, you don't even have to say anything. It's just the fact that you actually put your money where your mouth was is pretty remarkable to me. And so just a huge thanks.
Thank you. I really appreciate the kind words.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on.
Okay, all right.